All right, so diving into this deep dive,
You sent over all these articles on NPD and BPD,
right.
and it seems like you really want to get a handle on this stuff.
Especially with,
Yeah.
that situation you mentioned.
But honestly, good on you for looking into this.
Because understanding these disorders, it's not about slapping labels on people, right?
Right.
It's about figuring out how to deal with these relationships.
Exactly.
And, expert speaker, you always bring these incredible insights to these really,
Oh, thank you.
difficult, messy topics.
Help me out here.
Absolutely. And you're so right. Like, knowledge is power.
Especially with NPD and BPD, because, really understanding these conditions, it can really empower somebody to be able to make, informed decisions about how they want to move forward in their own lives.
Exactly.
When they're dealing with these really challenging relationships.
Okay, so to get us started, how do we even tell these two apart?
NPD and BPD, I mean, they sound similar. How do we differentiate?
Yeah, they do.
So I think a really helpful way to view this is through the lens of Kernberg, who was a psychoanalyst.
And he saw NPD as sort of a kind of a defense
Right.
defense mechanism against, almost like they build a fortress.
To protect against the underlying chaos of BPD.
So NPD is like building a wall to mask
Yeah.
deeper vulnerability.
Exactly, yeah. So imagine somebody who's plastering on this veneer of grandiosity, needing that constant admiration
Yeah.
to avoid confronting those deeper feelings of inadequacy or emptiness.
Okay,
So that's NPD.
that makes sense.
So if NPD is about building walls, what's going on inside the walls with BPD?
BPD is less about walls and more about like riding a roller coaster. Right?
Oh.
The emotions are so intense.
And they're up and down, and 1 minute they're up, 1 minute they're down.
Wow.
So
That sounds exhausting.
it can be, yeah, because
Yeah.
a lot of it stems from this really deep-seated fear of abandonment.
And so relationships have become very intense,
Yeah.
often volatile,
Uh-huh.
as individuals with BPD are grappling with this fear.
So it's not just we're not just looking at labels. We're talking about what's the emotional experience
Exactly.
underneath.
Yeah.
Which makes me think about some of these these real-life examples that you sent.
These phrases like, you're crazy, or no one else could do this job as well as I do,
Yeah.
these seem,
Textbook NPT.
Ugh.
So what's going on beneath the surface there?
well, you're crazy. I mean,
Yeah.
that's gaslighting, right?
Yeah.
100%.
It's like a gut punch.
It is, yeah.
Especially when you're already feeling unsteady.
Absolutely.
Oh,
And
yeah.
it's meant to make you feel crazy?
It's meant to deflect responsibility,
Yeah.
shift blame, and it keeps the person with MPD firmly in control of the situation.
And what about that need to be the best, to constantly assert their superiority?
Just their ego is this insatiable beast
It is.
that needs constant feeding.
You're not wrong.
People with MPD, they often have this very grandiose self-image
Right.
that requires constant admiration.
And they will achieve this through, maybe it's their accomplishments, maybe
Yeah.
it's their possessions, or unfortunately by diminishing those around them.
Which brings us to BPD.
Okay.
You share these examples, the swings from I love you, you're perfect, to I hate you, you're horrible.
Right.
It's emotional whiplash.
It is.
And for the person on the receiving end of that, it is so disorienting.
Right.
Because they're like, wait, what?
Yeah, exactly.
5 minutes ago.
Which version of this am I going to get?
Yeah.
And again, it goes back to that fear of abandonment, right?
Those are very, very intense emotional reactions to this terror of being rejected, right?
So they're clinging on for dear life and often pushing the person away at the same time.
It's so hard.
Yeah.
And then you layer on top of that the threat of self-harm.
Like, if you leave me, I'll hurt myself.
Right. It's heartbreaking and manipulative all at the same time.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder how someone can even begin to
Navigate a relationship like that.
It's really tough.
And I think, the thing to keep in mind is that it often comes from this place of desperation.
It's like this frantic attempt to regain control
Okay.
when they feel themselves slipping away.
So it sounds like with NPD and BPD, we're talking about boundaries are just
absolutely.
getting completely demolished in these situations.
Yeah, you're right.
Healthy boundaries are important in any relationship, but with NPD and BPD, they are often crossed,
Yeah.
manipulated, or
Yeah.
completely disregarded.
Yeah.
And, with NPD, it's about maintaining power and control.
Okay.
With BPD, it's about trying to regulate those really intense emotions.
And stave off that fear of being abandoned.
This all sounds so heavy.
It is.
So emotionally charged. And it makes you think about, like,
Right.
what are the long-term effects on the people who
Yeah.
are caught in these webs?
So we've talked about all these complex emotional dynamics at play with NPD and BPD.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking about, our listener.
This really plays out in a relationship over time.
Right.
Expert speaker, what are the long-term consequences?
Well, with NPD, it can be incredibly damaging, right? Because you have this pattern of manipulation, of exploitation.
It's like they're draining the emotional resources of
Right.
people around them.
Leaving them feeling depleted, feeling worthless.
And it's not like the person with NPD
Is thriving either.
Right. Exactly. They might maintain that.
Facade of success, of charm.
Right.
But underneath it all.
They're often grappling with their own
Right.
deep-seated insecurities.
Yeah.
It's a recipe for dysfunction.
Totally.
For everybody involved.
And with BPD, I mean, those roller coaster emotions,
Oh, absolutely.
you can only imagine that takes a toll on everyone.
It does, that constant fear of abandonment.
The intensity of the mood swings.
Yeah.
It creates this really exhausting cycle for everybody.
I mean, loved ones often talk about feeling like they're walking on eggshells.
Oh, totally.
Never knowing what's going to trigger, like, an outburst.
Right, right.
So it's emotionally draining, and it can really erode.
Even the strongest bonds over time.
You mentioned something earlier that really struck me.
And it's this idea of the guilt and confusion that victims of narcissistic abuse often experience.
Which, on the surface, seems kind of strange, right?
Right.
Because if you're being manipulated and mistreated...
But would you feel guilty?
Right, and that's one of the, most insidious things about narcissistic abuse.
Okay.
Is that it really does make you question your reality. And, we talked about gaslighting earlier.
Right.
And that constant distortion of reality.
Right.
It can make you doubt your own perception.
Doubt your memories.
Wow.
And, the narcissist might twist situations around.
Yeah.
Deny things that they said or did project their own flaws onto you.
So then you start to internalize that.
Yes.
And blame yourself for their behavior.
Exactly. Exactly.
Which is, wow.
It's like this self-doubt that becomes so powerful.
That's so damaging.
So knowing that,
yeah,
what can someone in that situation even do?
Like, what are those first steps to even begin to reclaim your sense of self?
Well, I think the first step is acknowledging that what you're experiencing is real.
Okay.
And that it's not your fault.
It's really about breaking through that self-blame and shame.
Right.
That the narcissist has so carefully constructed.
So it's like reclaiming your own narrative.
Exactly, yeah. And then from there, it's about building a support system.
Okay.
Whether that's trusted friends.
Family members, a therapist.
Right.
Who can offer validation.
Yeah.
And guidance.
And what about boundaries?
Oh, boundaries, yes.
Essential.
Because it feels like in these situations,
yeah,
that's like a huge part of it, right?
Huge. And it can be so challenging.
To establish and maintain those boundaries.
Right.
Especially with someone who really thrives on pushing those boundaries.
Right. This has been, wow.
Eye-opening. Expert speaker.
As always.
Thank you.
As we wrap up here.
What's the one thing you really want our listener to take away?
From this deep dive.
You are not alone.
Yeah.
These are complex, deeply rooted disorders.
And healing from their impact takes time.
Right.
And courage.
Sure.
But there is hope, and with support, with self-compassion.
You can break free from these toxic patterns.
And create a life that is filled with healthy, fulfilling relationships.
It's a journey, not a sprint.
There you go.
It starts with understanding.
So, listener, if any of this resonated with you,
take a moment to really reflect on it.
Yeah.
Maybe jot down some of your thoughts, do a little research on your own.
Or reach out to someone you trust.
That's it.
You deserve healthy relationships.
You deserve to feel safe and respected.
And remember, asking for help is not a sign of weakness.
Never.
It's a sign of incredible strength.